Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, a Prancing Pony podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. It's time to wrap up week 75 with Silmarillion Saturday. These Saturdays are our chance to revisit the history and legends of the Elder Days, sometimes from the Silmarillion, sometimes unfinished tales, sometimes something else altogether. Last series, we began Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, ironically ending at the end of the Second Age. So this series, we're going to finish up Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, as today we take a look at the aftermath of the Last Alliance and the all-too-temporary destruction of Sauron. Thus began the Third Age of the world, after the Eldest Days and the Black Years. And there was still hope in that time, and the memory of mirth. And for long the white tree of the Eldar flowered in the courts of the kings of men. For the seedling which he had saved, Isildur planted in the citadel of Anor in memory of his brother, ere he departed from Gondor. The servants of Sauron were routed and dispersed, yet they were not wholly destroyed, and though many men turned now from evil and became subject to the heirs of Elendil, yet many more remembered Sauron in their hearts and hated the kingdoms of the West. The Dark Tower was leveled to the ground, yet its foundations remained, and it was not forgotten. The Númenóreans indeed set a guard upon the land of Mordor, but none dared dwell there because of the terror of the memory of Sauron, and because of the mountain of fire that stood nigh to Barad-dûr, and the valley of Gorgoroth was filled with ash. Many of the elves and many of the Númenóreans and of men who were their allies had perished in the battle and the siege, and Elendil the Tall and Gil-galad the High King were no more. Never again was such a host assembled, nor was there any such league of elves and men, for after Elendil's day, the two kindreds became estranged. The ruling ring passed out of the knowledge even of the wise in that age, yet it was not unmade, for Isildur would not surrender it to Elrond and Círdan who stood by. They counseled him to cast it into the fire of Orodruin nigh at hand, in which it had been forged, so that it should perish, and the power of Sauron be forever diminished, and he should remain only as a shadow of malice in the wilderness. But Isildur refused this counsel, saying, "This I will have as weregild for my father's death, and my brother's. Was it not I that dealt the enemy his death blow?" And the ring that he held seemed to him exceedingly fair to look on, and he would not suffer it to be destroyed. Taking it therefore, he returned at first to Minas Anor, and there planted the white tree in memory of his brother Anarion. But soon he departed, and after he had given counsel to Meneldil, his brother's son, and had committed to him the realm of the south, he bore away the ring to be an heirloom of his house, and marched north from Gondor by the way that Elendil had come. And he forsook the south kingdom, for he purposed to take up his father's realm in Eriador, far from the shadow of the Black Land. But Isildur was overwhelmed by a host of orcs that lay in wait in the misty mountains, and they descended upon him at unawares in his camp between the greenwood and the great river, nigh to Loeg Ningloran, the Gladden fields, for he was heedless and set no guard, deeming that all his foes were overthrown. There well nigh all his people were slain, and among them were his 3 elder sons, Elendur, Aratan, and Cirion. But his wife and his youngest son, Valandil, he had left in Imladris when he went to the war. Isildur himself escaped by means of the ring, for when he wore it he was invisible to all eyes. But the orcs hunted him by scent and slot until he came to the river and plunged in. There the ring betrayed him and avenged its maker, for it slipped from his finger as he swam, and it was lost in the water. Then the orcs saw him as he labored in the stream, and they shot him with many arrows, and that was his end. Only 3 of his people came ever back over the mountains after long wandering, and of these one was Oktar, his esquire, to whose keeping he had given the shards of the sword of Elendil. This begins with a really stark reminder that this victory, while great and wonderful and all of that, was not complete. No victory ever can be, not in Middle-earth. Sure, Sauron's bad guys were beaten, but they weren't entirely destroyed. Sure, some of the men turned from their wicked ways and submitted to the kingship of Isildur and Anarion. Well, by this point just Isildur, because Anarion was dead. But most of them honored Sauron's memories and hated Gondor and Arnor. Remember, most of those were descended from the evil Númenóreans, the king's men. They despised the faithful, that is, Elendil and his people. We even get an indication that while Barad-dûr itself was demolished, the foundation wasn't destroyed. And yet even this partial victory came at a massive cost. So many elves and men were dead, and never again would such a force be gathered together of both of them, because they were estranged. We also get a close-up of Isildur's refusal to relinquish the ring. He claims it as weregild for the deaths of his father and brother. The thing is, that's not an entirely unreasonable thing. I've talked about weregild on the PPP a few times lately, but the idea of a monetary payment for death is appropriate. It's just that clearly Isildur was already being influenced by the ring. And then we get the all-too-quick version of his death. Now, someday we're going to read The Disaster of the Gladden Fields together, as I've always felt this version is incomplete enough as to unintentionally give us an inaccurate picture of who Isildur was. But I'll save that for another day. For now, folks, that does it for this week's Silmarillion Saturday and for week 75. Thank you for joining me, and please come back next week as we continue Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, as we see the splendor of Gondor increase and the Nazgul make their first strike. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can get an ad-free episode feed, bonus episodes, and be a part of my content council. Podcast listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps. For those on YouTube, please like and subscribe to this channel to get all of the PPP productions, eventually including all the seasons of both the PPP, Rings of Power Wrap-Up, and this show, along with my new streaming project, PPP Plays. And be sure you're following at Prancing Pony Pod on Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and simply the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook. And finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.